Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin have wrapped up a high-profile visit to Ukraine. The two U.S. secretaries met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and assured him America will help him achieve his goal of defeating Russia. They also announced the U.S. is providing $713 million in new military aid to Ukraine and allied countries. U.S. officials say America's total military assistance to Ukraine has now reached $3.7 billion. Meanwhile, the Russian offensive shows no signs of slowing down. This video, posted to social media and verified by ABC News, shows the moment a Russian missile hit a residential building, killing at least 8 people. And videos circulating online show an explosion at a fuel depot in Bryansk, Russia. So far, there's been no official confirmation of the cause. And this all comes as Russia wages a new offensive in eastern Ukraine. Let's bring in ABC's Marcus Moore live in Irpin, Ukraine, along with Alex Perche in Washington, and ABC News contributor and former Marine Colonel Stephen Ganyard for more on this. Marcus, Orthodox Easter was this weekend, but President Zelensky says that Russia rejected a proposal for an Easter truce. What's the latest on the ongoing negotiations?
Yeah, well, Diane, first of all, this was a very different Easter celebration for people here in Ukraine for obvious reasons. And we know that President Zelensky has said that he still is and has been open to meeting with Vladimir Putin and trying to negotiate peace. But we are, at this point, we don't know what the nature of those negotiations have been and how much progress they have been able to make. As you've already said, that the fighting, the shelling continued over the weekend, despite calls for a ceasefire. And so it remains to be seen exactly what type of negotiations are happening and how much success they'll be able to have in the days ahead.
Now, Steve, Secretary Blinken says Russia has already failed to achieve its stated goals in Ukraine. Now the UK Defense Ministry says Russia's shifting its focus to fully occupy the Donbas regions, but that they have yet to achieve a significant breakthrough there. So how is Ukraine holding off Russia's advance, and can they keep it up?
Well, Diane, I think what the U.S. is really seeing, and I think what the Ukrainians are seeing, are probes. The Russians are trying to find weak spots in the line. So while this offensive in the Donbass has begun, it isn't the all-out attack with huge artillery barrages that the U.S. and the Ukrainians are feared. So it's early on in this part of the war. It is a new phase of the war. It will be very different. It will be much more reliant on artillery and tanks, the kinds of things that the Russians used to be good at. But as of right now, it's just probing attacks, and we haven't seen the full thrust of Russia's might.
And Alex, President Biden is formally nominating the current Slovakian ambassador, Bridget Brink, to serve as ambassador to Ukraine. What does that mean?
Well, look, I mean, this is someone who is tested, who actually knows the region. As you mentioned, served as a former ambassador to Slovakia and now serving as this U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, according to a senior State Department official, a career-long diplomat as the U.S. tries again to prop up its support for the Ukrainian government in its fight against Russia.
And Marcus, in Mariupol, humanitarian corridors did not open as scheduled because Russian troops in the area did not confirm a ceasefire. So how dire is the situation there, especially for those civilians still trapped?
Well, Diane, from everything that we've heard, the situation in Mariupol is incredibly dire. The city council there says that as many as 1,000 people, mostly women and children, are holed up in that steel plant, and they have no access to food or water and no safe exit. And I should point out that, to your question about negotiations, President Zelensky has said that if the people who are there, the fighters, as well as the civilians who are in Mariupol, if they are harmed in any way, he has said that there will be no more room for negotiation. So what happens in Mariupol will be significant for a number of reasons, not only symbolically, but of course, strategically, as Russia has been trying so hard to secure that city as they work to take over the Donbas region of Ukraine.
And Steve, the U.S. is now sending $713 million in new aid to Ukraine and to other allies, in addition to the billions in aid already provided. What impact could that have, and how important is this aid to Ukraine's defense?
Well, hopefully Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin had a better chance to understand exactly what the Ukrainians need over the weekend. Right now, the kinds of things that the Ukrainians need is changing. The kinds of things that they've asked for early on in the war are very different from what they're going to need to defend in the Donbass. So that means more heavy U.S. artillery. The U.S. is trying to scour all the former Eastern Bloc nations that are now part of NATO for that Soviet-era kind of ammunition. So the U.S. ammunition and the kind of artillery that the U.S. uses is actually a different caliber. It's about 3 millimeters different. So you can't use U.S. Artillery shells in Russian equipment. So the challenge here is to go out and find what they can. But eventually, if this conflict continues on, the Ukrainians are going to need to change the kind of equipment that they use towards more U.S. or NATO sort of standard. And that will take time because now you have to retrain crews. So right now, it's all hands on deck, and we'll see if it's effective.
Alex, where do the diplomatic efforts go from here?
Well, Diane, I mean, that's the $100 million question, right? And certainly there have been positive talks. We've heard positive rhetoric from both sides, willing to meet at various points. But again, it's just been talk thus far, and we haven't seen any substantial action. And then also, whenever you look at some of the other bodies, whether it be the UN Security Council, President Zelensky being openly critical of this body, saying that essentially, if it doesn't act, it should dissolve itself. The one thing that we can say thus far is that the U.S. is continuing its support of Ukraine. The allies are continuing its support of Ukraine. And right now, we don't see an end to this conflict.
All right, Alex Brachet, Steve Ganyard, Marcus Moore, thank you.